Welcome into the Husker247 Podcast. I'm Michael Bruntz, Brian Christopherson over there. Mike Schaefer back on assignment. We'll see him soonish here in May, but we're kind of in that lull in the sports calendar, I guess. You're post spring ball now, a couple weeks out. Hoops is grinding away in the transfer portal. Baseball's getting down the home stretch here. We'll hit on a little bit of everything today on the podcast, but I want to go first, Brian, to kind of like, I guess you're starting to, as part of that lull, you're seeing the not way too early top 25s, but still early top 25s, the post-spring top 25s. I've seen a few bowl projections already, which you know how much I love those.
Where are we going?
So the last one I saw, Nebraska potentially in Nashville. So there's that. I would take Nashville in a heartbeat at this point. I'd take any bowl game. If you played a bowl game at Buell Stadium in Millard in the middle of December, I would at least consider that a nice trip to go up to the big city. So anyways, yesterday, I think it was, Joel Klatt dropped his top 25. Nebraska checks in at 22. Mm-hmm. 22. How much are you sipping the Kool-Aid post-spring right now?
I'm taking a little sip.
Sip. Top 25 sip? That kind of a sip?
No, I would not put him in the top 25, but I can see why someone would. Like, I don't think it's a reach. Because I've always been of the opinion that like teams basically 10 through 55, like however you want to sort them, are decided by like inches, like just little, like there's sometimes like a 4 or 5 win team that is basically almost as good as the team that's ranked like 12th in the country some years. Like, but it's this thing happened here, or they don't have a good kicker or whatever. Turnovers, of course, are a big part of it. And I think there's a lot of people like Joel Klatt who look at the metrics with Nebraska football. Now, they've done this before in past seasons, so this is where people around here are like, okay, yeah, I've heard this story before. But you look at it and you're like, that should be an 8-win team, right? A 9-win team. That should have been, I mean, they could have won 7 last year easily. And so people can talk themselves into that. However, this time, why it might be different is we saw the quarterback play in the spring game. It's going to be better. Like we can say that without saying we got to rename the Davey O'Brien trophy the Dylan O'Brien trophy. Like we don't have to go that far or act like it's just going to be all roses. There's going to be some tough days in there, but can't you have both opinions? Like, yeah, there's going to be growing pains, but the quarterback spot is going to be improved because it was pretty low to the ground last year, if we're just honest about it. And they have more weapons on the perimeter at wide receiver. They just do. They've got, the 2 veterans in there, and some young guys have come along, and they've sort of changed the picture there. So I don't want to go overboard off of what we saw in the spring game, but I do think that combined with what we heard throughout the spring and just the optimism about the offense is really tracking at a good pace. And then you kind of look at the metrics last year and you're like, okay, they were minus, was it 17 in turnovers or whatever? What if they were even? Like, what if they're even for a year, in turnovers? Like, what would that be like? How would we react to it? Would you even know what to do with yourself, Bruntz?
We'd have a parade. We would have a parade. We would go down to 14th and O Street, and we would light off fireworks if they're even in turnovers. That's what we would do.
Yeah, it would be like, when I was a kid and they won the national championship, it was 72nd and Dodge by Crossroads was where the big party was. I don't know where it would be now. But a similar sort of gathering if they were +3 in turnover margin by the end of the season, I would say.
Yeah, no, you definitely be going out by Family Fun Center and getting honked at for sure. Is it as simple as the quarterback thing though? Like, I think that's kind of the seeing what that looked like in the red-white game. I feel like it's nationally that picture is as simple as like the quarterback play will be better, and
Yeah.
I feel like it's just because then like the secondary conversation is also like, oh, this defense has a chance to be pretty good this year. It's like, well, they were pretty good last year too.
Mhm.
But I mean, it's I guess in my mind, it's like, well, the floor at the quarterback spot is considerably higher. I think the ceiling is considerably higher too, because I think last year they were pretty much like, one and the same almost. Like I don't think the ceiling was particularly high. Like that I can get on board with Nebraska probably receiving a vote or two
Mhm.
in the preseason poll. Which, by the way, preseason polls are exceedingly dumb, but that's besides the point. Um, but I think that I can talk myself into receiving votes, like a couple votes. Like you're going to get somebody that's really dialed in that says like this is a team that I can put at 25 on my ballot, and that's going to be the vote they're going to receive.
Yeah. I'll be really candid here. If I had a vote and I'm in the state of Nebraska, I would not put Nebraska in my top 25, even though I think someone could, um, in part because it's like they haven't proven it. And it's like, all right, the homer, like I'm not going to be the in-state guy who puts them 23rd. I'll let other people do that and then I'll let them prove it to me for a couple of weeks. It's not that big a deal if they're not in there right away. But if I were a guy in Boise, Idaho, who covers Boise State, and I was voting, and I wanted to be like, okay, this is my moment, right? 21 through 25 is where I shine, and I'm gonna give you some teams that like haven't been there lately, but look, and you're gonna at the end of the year, no one's gonna remember, but you're talking to yourself, everyone's gonna remember. Like I had Nebraska 21st, like in the preseason poll. They are one of those teams where like there's probably 8 to 10 of them you could find in the country where you look at the metrics, you look at sort of what's returning and like how certain pieces fit, and it would make sense to have them be like your wild card team. Like I feel like they fit that really well, like to people who want to show off how big their brain is with college football. And it's not, it's okay. Like it's, if you're wrong, who cares? So also you get a lot of clicks. You put Nebraska 22nd. Like we wrote a big story about it. Everybody around here. I mean, people aren't dumb. They know how this thing works. But yeah, all those things probably work together.
It's because Nebraska is officially in like sneaky pick territory for this season,
Yes,
right?
that's right. I'd love to think of one other offhand that would be there to go with this, but um, Nebraska definitely fits that because you can say, okay, top 10 defense, top 15. It's not a given they're going to be that again. And I think we need to remember that too. Like, we can't just act like you're just granted to be a top 8 defense again, just, or, whatever, because you return all these guys. But the parts are there to be really good on that side of the ball. And then I've always said with the offense, Bruntz, like, how this has been for years with Husker stats. Like, it's sadly been sort of easy where you could like go to whatever page you use for stats, scroll down on certain categories, especially on offense last year. It's just like, all right, you drop your bar down and it's like, all right, 115. Oh, they're 118 here. Okay. Then the next one. If Nebraska could change that where it becomes tricky this year in October, where you're like, oh, where are they? Like, oh, 73rd, that would be all right. Like if you combine that with the defense that holds with where they've been, you'd win 8 games that way, I think, if turnover margin were in check. And then you are kind of like a fringe top 25 team.
That kind of transitions okay, I think, to something you asked on the board this week. You did it for both sides of the ball. Start on offense. What's your biggest point of concern and what's your biggest point of confidence for what this offense is right now as we sit here in early May?
My biggest point of concern, it's not that I don't think I think they might have what it takes at running back. Like they might have the combination of guys, but there's sort of a what if factor that's involved with that position because Gabe wasn't out there. He's had those 2 tough injuries, so you don't know exactly what that's going to look like. Everybody wants it to look really good, especially for him, but in the team, Ramir, of course, coming back from his injury and how they're going to use him. And then, Emmett Johnson, I think, is really helped himself again to this spring and put himself in position to be one of either the guy or the second guy when it's all said and done. But I think it's still fair to ask, do they have that back who can have that series where you just go at somebody on an 11 play drive and he gets 7 or 8 carries and it's like 6 yards here when maybe it should have been 2 or 3. And then, he has that run where, and Gabe had a couple of these before he got hurt last year, like against Minnesota and Colorado, where he broke out, where it looked like it was going to be nothing. And he got like 25. Can you get a better abundance of those runs where you have a dynamic back, and you're not just okay, and so that's my biggest question with the offense. It's not the big that there's another one that would rival it, but I'll save room for you. But that's one of my, I don't know if it's a concern, but it's a thing you ponder, like how elite can they be at that spot?
Yeah, as you were kind of talking through that, I guess one thing that we haven't really talked enough about, I don't think, this spring, that I think we're kind of assuming that it's going to happen, and I think there's a strong chance it'll happen, but the offensive line needs to take another step forward.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you kind of look at the way that they've played the last couple of years, and this is the 3rd year with Donovan Raiola as their coach, I think it's been an arrow up group. I mean, I think they've kind of been on a gradual climb with the way they've played. I think that they had a great find in Ben Scott out of the transfer portal, last year. I think he kind of solidified things a lot. You have Bryce Benhart back. Teddy Prohaska had his second healthy spring of his career, which, I mean, that's a noteworthy thing as well. But I have questions about the guard spot, and I have questions about whether or not this line, what it can kind of make that next step and kind of do a little bit, I guess, of what you're talking about with the running backs. I mean, is this a group that you can lean on to, grind out 4 and 5 yards and give some help to what's likely to be a young quarterback? Can they pass protect well enough to give Nebraska's weapons on the edge time to complete passes and throw deep balls? I think they were better at that last year. I don't know that they were helped all the time with the way that Nebraska's quarterbacks kind of moved in the pocket or immediately bailed at the first sign of pressure. So, I think it's not a topic of concern. It's just I don't know that we've talked enough about it because we don't kind of know the cast of characters of what that 5 is going to look like, because you have Turner Corcoran, who's a little bit of an unknown about where he fits in. You have Micah Mazuka out of the transfer portal. I think he's probably going to factor there somehow. Lutovsky's in there. Justin Evans played center with Scott out in the spring game. He's probably a guard this year for you as well. I mean, there's a lot that kind of needs to be settled there. I think they have a lot of depth, but I don't know that we really know for sure that that's a group that you would absolutely feel comfortable betting on making a huge jump in this season.
Yeah, I think what we're both talking about is going from sort of, okay, that was okay, to that was really good. I mean, just like, okay, they, they took over a game in the 4th quarter. I remember the number rule brought up when he got here was like 75 plus in the 4th quarter. And there were times when that sort of showed itself or as a possibility. Honestly, the Minnesota game was going to be like that until the fumble with 5 minutes left. So there's these things that sort of sometimes get in the way that are beyond the control of like the guys up front. But yeah, that's the big question, because they did have on the surface pretty solid like run numbers for first year. That was the one thing that was okay. But this is a savvy fan base, the same way why I think people are like, yeah, I kind of think the quarterback spot is going to be something without being ridiculous about it. Is the same sort of thinking with this fan base with the running backs. Like, yeah, I think they're good, but I've seen great. Like, people have seen great here before. Like, what can it look like that with the guys they have? Can they reach that level? And that's obviously a combination between the two things we're talking about.
Defensively, what are you concerned about?
I'll cheat code this, but I've thought about it too before. But Rules talked about it multiple times. It's the like 4-man rush situation. Can you be that disruptive group and have someone who wreaks havoc, whether it be a Jamari Butler or whomever, without throwing a lot of curveballs at a team, like where you can just line up in sort of your base stuff and get home at certain times. And Rules talked about like being that group where it's like, okay, 3rd and 7+ for the opposition. They basically concede that you're going to win up front and they're going to have to run the ball or check down and maybe punt, like you want to be that sort of group. So I think there's still proof that has to come there. Like they have guys that you think can do it, and have done it at an okay level. Jamari was a good player last year. Like, can he be like a great player now? Just a game wrecker. Can someone like Javen Wright suddenly, pop up in a couple of those plays where he's a few inches from him? Can he make them get home on? So I think of like they got better as the season went on 3rd down defense, but a big part of this is going to be, can your pass rush get home, without having to go to a lot of exotic stuff. Sometimes you do want to do something fun and mess with people's heads a bit and get home, but you also got to do it the basic way at times. And so that'll be something they got to answer.
Yeah, it is. I guess my mind kind of goes to the secondary picture. I mean, I feel like up front you're okay depth wise. Linebacker, I think you can make that picture work. The secondary, that's a little bit of a concern. I mean, I think there's still some things that need to be sorted out. I mean, you've got Bly Hill probably coming back around the time that the season's going to start after getting injured in the spring game. You're still looking for that starter opposite of Tommy Hill. And I think he was probably towards the front of the pack to emerge there in that spot. So somebody's going to need to step up. I mean, there's a chance you could see a young guy sneak in there and get some playing time, whether that's, Buford as a freshman or, it feels like Hartzog's probably more of a safety at this point. He can play some corner. Jeremiah Charles out there as well. I mean, there's a lot of things that are kind of need to get figured out. Safety's kind of the same way. Deshaun Singleton didn't really do much this spring at all. He was so good there last year in small doses. You'd love to see that kind of continue, but you don't know how he's going to be coming off of things. So that's probably my biggest concern is just how that picture looks. I mean, and it's with the volume of guys that they have there on scholarship, you would think that there would be a way to kind of make all the pieces fit together and make it work. And I think it will. But as we sit here in May, I don't know ultimately what that's going to look like. I mean, even Dwight Boodle was playing a little bit of safety during the red-white game. I didn't mind the way that looked. So that's something that kind of needs to get hashed out in the fall, is how that's going to look and, who's going to be able to contribute there. That's probably my biggest concern, I think, as we sit here in May.
No, that's fair. I'll flip it and let you go first on, okay, offense. What's like something that you feel like really good about or better about now that spring is over?
The intermediate passing game looked good to me in the red-white game. Part of that was the quarterbacks. Part of that, I think, is the additions that they made out of the transfer portal at wide receiver. I think part of that is another year of improvement and growth for the tight end group. But it just seemed like the crispness of the offense, a lot of it was based on the short stuff and the crossing routes. And they They had a screen pretty well set up as well, which, I mean, that you got to mark that in your scorebook when that happens. And I think that gives me confidence because I know that Nebraska is going to be able to hit the occasional deep ball. They showed it last year, even when the offense was really kind of trying to find its footing. But if you can get the intermediate passing game going, that brings in the tight ends more in the offense. I think it allows you to take advantage of some of the speed that you have with Barney, with Nair, with Jalen Lloyd. And so I liked that a lot more in the development of that. And I think that was probably the most surprising thing to me in the red-white game was like, okay, this looks completely different than what we saw and where we kind of left things last November.
I'm glad you mentioned Nair. I'm going to go with a different answer in a second, but for good reason. A lot of the attention from the spring game was like about Barney and Lloyd, because it's the young guys and all that. But Nair, even though he had like 2 or 3 catches and one of them got called back, it was actually the one that got called back where you saw that like burst. He's a long strider, as they like to say. I love when people bust that out. He is though. But he turned the corner, and whoever the defender was thought he had the angle on him, and he definitely did not. It was like, oh, he's like 4 yards beyond me by the time he got to that intersection. And I really think like he's a guy who, as much as we kind of think we've talked about like the veterans and stuff, like I think a lot of it was about Banks early on.
Mm-hmm.
And when I saw Nair in person, and I think back to what he did before injury, and like if he can kind of get close to that here, that could be pretty dynamic. He was out there with the first group too. And I just thought after the QBs, like Nair almost jumped out to me as much as anybody. Just like when, even on that one play, it's just like, man, that was pretty electric when he got in space and turned the corner there.
Yeah. Is there anything offensively that you feel pretty good about?
Yeah. This is quarterbacks are just, they're further along than I thought they would be. It's the biggest thing. I often talk around the biggest thing on these things. I end up talking about like left guard or something, and people is like, all right, I'll go listen to something else probably. But quarterbacks, like, I'll go back. I think I texted you this. Like, there were those 2 or 3 days where it was like, oh, maybe they're gonna get Kyle McCord and Dylan Raiola, and I was on that train. Like a lot of people's like, oh, that would be swell because then you have this bridge, into the future. Dylan sits behind him, learns. It sounds good. Watching Dylan up close and hearing about him, I just don't know that would have worked. I think the McCord family realized that wasn't going to work either. He's got the goods. Like again, there's going to be the potholes and all that stuff, but he just like has a command presence about him and way about him that really impressed me. Like I walked away thinking like I knew he'd be solid, but he's further along, and Harburg's further along, and Daniel Kaelin's further along than I thought they would be when spring began, if I'm honest about it. And so now they got to make that next jump through the summer, and fall camp's got to be another step for it to be where it has to be when the games start. But definitely that quarterback picture is why when Joel Klatt says, okay, I've got Nebraska 22 in my post spring, where I'm like, yeah, I could kind of see it because I think they're going to be a lot better at the main position. And so that's my answer.
Going over to defense, here's what it's not a group. I think it's the whole picture. This is maybe a cheating answer, but I'm fine with that. Another year of continuity on defense to me is huge. Like when you're talking about, you were talking earlier kind of about the 4-man rush. I mean, yes, you can try to win with 4 guys, but I think another year of this defense allows you to do more and different things with the exotic stuff, because this defense is already hard enough to prepare for as it is. But I think when you add in everybody being comfortable with the language, everybody being comfortable with expectations, I think it just opens the door so much more. And Yeah, I mean, Nebraska might take a step back defensively, but I think that continuity is just going to be so huge. And you heard it during the spring too. Like Tony White did not seem happy to me this spring. Did he to you? Like every time it was like it felt like there was a lot of pressure. Every time we saw public, pieces of practice, he was the one that was yelling the loudest. Uh, Javin Wright was talking about this a little bit about how he's usually the one that catches hell most from Tony White, and how nobody is really resting on what they did last season. Last season's in the past, and I think that will benefit them a lot more, and why I feel like there's a good chance that Nebraska can be close to what they were last year. I mean, the schedule is going to be a little bit different, but I think that defense has a chance to stay where they were, and if they can do that and even get a little bit better in certain areas, that looks okay to me.
I'm not saying you want to do this, but even if they dropped statistically a few numbers in a couple spots, but the takeaways went up, you could actually be a better defense. You know what I mean? Like if they could get like suddenly you're a 20 plus takeaway team, and let's say you're 16th in run defense, you'd still probably take that trade off. I agree with you though. I think that year too, that December, we can look back at it, was a fascinating time at how it flipped the quarterback conversation, but also with Tony White having real opportunities, and as happy as everyone would have been for him around here, because people would vote for that guy right now for about anything. There should be relief that he's back for one more year. And I think rules kind of said as much too, like having him back that, and as the other guys kind of have one more year to learn his system and kind of maybe be ready if they're called on in the future. So that's a big deal. I think my answer to this question as far as feeling good is it's got to be the front. I mean, I just the fact that Nash wrestled up until a few days before the spring season, and then he's out there trying to get in reps. Like even if they pull him back, like it sends a message to everybody, like this is what we're about right now. And I think him and Ty Robinson, even though they were on a pitch count this spring, it was useful for them and to be overseers and kind of look at it in a big picture sense. And then you got to give a lot of reps to guys like you wrote about Sua Lafotu, who's a big dude. And it sounds like he maybe turned a corner, so maybe he gets some more reps. And then Riley Van Poppel, I know, gained confidence from his stop on the goal line and playing after that. And then he's gained weight. He's gained like 10 to 12 pounds. So I feel like the defensive front, we probably felt good about him pre-spring, but I continue to think like, man, that's a good picture, especially with Lenhart, and then with Princewell comes back and all that stuff. Jamari, if you count him as a DN, it's a good looking group. It can be a great group. Now you need a couple of them to be like first, second team all conference type players. And comes with, making plays behind the line of scrimmage and also winning more games. But consider where we were a year ago at this time, Bruntz. In a podcast like this, we would have been asking questions about the D line. Like a couple of guys had transferred out that ultimately didn't matter that much, I don't think, to what Nebraska was doing. And Nebraska covered it really well. And then now it's like, can they take the next step from that?
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's funny how quickly that flips. Speaking of flipping, we're going to flip over to basketball and a little bit of baseball here after we take a very, very short break. We'll be right back. All right, the transfer portal for basketball closed up, but guys are still trying to find spots. Nebraska basketball, 2 scholarships open. They added, I guess it was right around the time that we recorded last week, they added Braxton Mia, 7-footer from Washington with 1 year left. Some valuable post depth, especially in light of the rink mast news from the week that he's going to miss all of next season after undergoing knee surgery. Give us a lay of the land right now, Brian, with two spots left. What does Nebraska need to do, and do you think that they use both scholarships? How do you think this plays out, and what's left on the board?
I don't know for sure to the latter question. I think you don't force something just to do it. Like you want it to be someone who's actually going to be useful and can help your program. I think you've thought the same as me, like a stretch four like that, finding that, just like one more guy he can shoot it from outside, but he gives you that like 6'10", 6'9" presence. I think would be really useful for your front line with this group. I like the additions they have so far, and we refresher on that. You got Raleigh Wooster, you got Braxton Mia, the big man, 7'1", as you mentioned. Gavin Griffiths coming over from Rutgers after 1 year in that program, was a top 100 recruit a year ago. Connor Asijan coming over from Wisconsin. Of course, he was all freshman Big Ten 2 years ago, did not play as much this last season. And then Andrew Morgan, who you'd have to highlight now, wouldn't you? 6'10". And when they were courting him, rink film was what they showed. Like, this is how we use rink. And he really liked how this floor spaces for him. And he's going to have to step into a big role, I think, right away. And I think that's why he came here. Let's not play dumb about this. Like, I'm sure guys knew like Rink was considering, like his situation, and that there was a possibility that he might not be available. But Rink was such a solid player, so that's not a small thing that he's medically redshirting this upcoming season. He just did so many things well. He had a calmness about him as a facilitator in the offense, and obviously he could go off on a given night where he had like 34 against Ohio State. So you're going to need that same sort of demeanor and like sort of versatility from a guy like Andrew Morgan, perhaps.
Do you think Nebraska, like if you look at the way the roster is constructed right now, are they going to have to change the way that they facilitate their offense? Like in the past couple of
That's
years,
a good question.
They've run it through the bigs. I mean,
Yeah.
with Derek Walker and Mast, but what do you think that looks like as of now, with some additions probably still to come?
That's a good question. I mean, I think you could certainly do variations of what they've done. So I would guess that's still a big part of it, but you've got probably more true point guard play on your roster now this year, which maybe changes the equation a little bit. Like Raleigh Wooster, I think they feel great about that one. I mean, that's a guy who's played a lot of college basketball and started a lot of games. Aaron Eulis, of course, is in that mix too, and played in the Big Ten at Iowa. So, and Bryce Williams, even though you don't maybe want him to be your every all-time point guard or whatever, like he grew comfortable, like at times taking that role when he had to in games and being the lead guard. So I think your question's a good one to watch. Just like how it shifts now with some point guard play, you probably feel is a little bit more sturdy and seasoned than it has been in the past. And maybe it does switch a little bit how they run their offense. But the key thing is always going to be, like you talked to Andrew Morgan, he's like, when you watch the film of Hoiberg's offense, and Asijan said this too, it's just a spacing that he, whatever they do, it always opens up the floor. It opens up cuts to the basket. It's just so great for shooters. And so you got to maintain that, obviously.
Do you think they've addressed their needs to this point? I mean, I think at the start of the portal season, you would have said you needed size in the post. You would have liked some point guard help, maybe a couple shooters on the wings. I mean, it feels like they've done an okay job of at least kind of checking the boxes, so to speak, of what they needed. Not statistically maybe, but just in certain types of players, I think.
I think so. I'd like one more like power forward type guy. I really would, to the roster. But again, it's got to be someone. I saw a team. I'm not going to even say who it is because who knows, but I saw a team add someone last night. and it made me shrug. It was one of those where it's like, okay, we're to that point where some teams are adding because they probably need to fill some spots, but it's like, is that going to actually help you win in this league or get done what you want to do? And I would say, to your question, of the additions that Nebraska's had so far, every one of them has made a lot of sense to me. Like you're like, okay, I get exactly where that works and how that can work with that. Um, you're also banking on some guys responding to a little bit of adversity. Like Hasijan did not have the year he wanted and was coming off a little bit of an injury and did not play a lot. He's got to sort of refined it here now. Same with Gavin Griffiths. He was that big recruit and had kind of an off shooting year where he was like 28% from behind the arc. I think they believe in those guys, that they are great shooters and in this system can excel, but they've got to go prove it. And they make a lot of sense as pickups, but you've got to have it's so hard, I would think, as a college coach now, once you Bruntz, like how you got to blend this every year and try to find the exact puzzle pieces. And there's going to be a year or two where you don't get it right. I get emotional talking about it.
Jeez, man, you
I'm
hit
sorry.
the
I do. I mean, it's just so hard, but you can take it. You can take it from. You can take it from here while I clear out, get some tissues over here.
Yeah, jeez. One other piece that Nebraska added this week, kind of an interesting piece. Is it Bolus? Justin Bolus? Bolus?
Yeah.
Lincoln native, went to Southeast Community College for his freshman year, commits to Nebraska as a preferred walk-on, but had really good numbers in his freshman year. Take us through that a little bit, because it's a preferred walk-on, but it doesn't feel like a kind of traditional late preferred walk-on ad, if that makes sense.
It's all an upside for both parties, because Justin Bolus, he said this as like in the interview he did with us. He went to Lincoln High and his confidence wasn't like soaring like leaving high school. Like he was at, I think, average like 8 or 9 points per game as a senior in high school. 6 boards or something like that. So he went to Southeast Community College, and he's worked with the shooting coach in the area, and same coach that works with Jazz Shelley, by the way. And he shot he doesn't shoot a ton of threes, but he hit like 37%. He found a mid-range jumper that he felt more comfortable with. He averaged like 15 or 16 points per game last year and was sort of the guy, that things worked around. And it just sort of boosted like how he thought, I think, about his game and what he can do. And so you're getting a player that in some ways is like maybe not raw as a basketball player, but raw and like that he's in the early stages of like what I can actually be in a 6'9" body. So yeah, I'd take my chances with that as a walk on, and who knows where that could turn into. Does that affect like next season? It seems like that's a long shot probably. But over time, that could be a very useful player. And you also, in this day and age, when you're stacking up like all these portal guys, you do want veterans, and there's all these seniors that are on your roster. But I also think you need that mix of like underclassmen, first, second year players who are growing behind the scenes. I still think there's something to be said for that and what it does to your roster and the whole makeup of things. So, I'm happy for him. It seems like he's a great kid that everybody sort of was just thrilled for when he announced the news. So he's going to be a good locker room player and just a guy with potential and size. So that doesn't hurt.
Those are two good things to start out with, if you're kind of looking long term. I agree with you too. I mean, I think as much value as there is in adding veteran, fifth year guys out of the portal, I think a guy like Gavin Griffiths, who, has only played 1 year college basketball and has a chance to kind of grow in that offense, I think there's a ton of value there too, long term. So where you're not having to completely reset the deck every year.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else with hoops? We're good with hoops?
Yeah, I think we're good with hoops until the next thing pops up. It's It's an interesting offseason now that college basketball coaches, their vacation time has to be. I wonder what Hoiberg, like if his golf game has suffered the last few years because of this portal stuff. We'll have to ask him that.
Yeah, I'm sure. It's got to be hard to keep the game up when you're chasing portal guys and recruiting, doing like 5-day recruitments and stuff like that.
Yep.
Lastly, let's go to baseball real quick. Kind of an interesting week for Nebraska baseball. Last week, you drop another one to Creighton, get swept there. Things are looking bleak. The midweek conversation's getting a little bit louder, and then Jackson Brockett comes off the milk carton and throws the first 9-inning individual no-hitter in 70 years. So I don't really know what to make of that. Baseball is a delightfully stupid game sometimes, and you never really know what you're going to get until you get to the park. And that was one of the more cool things I think I've seen in person in terms of baseball. Was just a guy that had not been able to put it together this season, all of a sudden doing it in a very dominating way against a pretty good K-State team. So you have that, and then Nebraska goes and takes 2 of 3 from Minnesota on the weekends and sits tied for second as we look ahead to this weekend. They're hosting Indiana, who's also one of the teams at 12-6 in conference play. Purdue's the other. Illinois is at 13-5. So lots to still play for here. A Big Ten regular season crown is still within reach, and Nebraska sitting pretty steady in the low 20s in the RPI conversation as we get into the final 2 weekends. What do you make of all that, Brian Christopherson, and where should we go?
I always like these conversations because you know it as well as anybody. And I think I am sort of the general person, like who sort of like picks up on the midweek chatter. I'm part of the general public that is just, that is just like, oh man, what's up with these dudes? They keep losing to Creighton. You kind of get distracted by that. And then one day I'm texting you and I'm like, are they going to make it, to the tournament? And you're like, oh, they could host still a regional. And I was like, what the stink is so that's what I think that's where the people are though. Like, it's sort of that confusion because the midweek stuff gets in our way sometimes. So it was probably good that we have that no-hitter situation, kind of got everybody like sitting up in their chair, like, oh, that's nice. It kind of got distracted from the Creighton debacle. And now there's this standings check, and it's like, okay, we got a legitimate championship they are chasing these last 2 weekends of the season. And so this is when it's always fun. Like, it's sort of, if we could bring it to football quick, like we've always asked the football program, like get it to like November 10th where you're on the graphic, where if you do this, when you win it. And that's where they are right now. They're in that position. My question to you is, what do you think they have to do looking at the schedules of all those involved to win it? Probably got to win 4 of 6 at least.
Yeah. Cause with Indiana being one of those teams that's in the car crash at the top, you got to win the series this weekend. And then you have to go. Nebraska ends the regular season at Michigan State, against what's actually a pretty plucky Michigan State team who's kind of right on the bubble for making the Big Ten tournament. And those types of teams are a little bit scary to me when it gets to this time of year. When you got teams that are playing decent baseball, they just took a series off of Michigan. They've got a lot to play for, and they've got some weapons. And, Nebraska, I think what's difficult for kind of casual baseball fans to kind of wrap their heads around is you can have 2 things be true. Like, Nebraska can struggle in midweek games, and they have recently. And you can also be kind of on the fringe conversation of the host. I don't think that Nebraska will end up hosting. Like, I think they've dropped a couple of games, not midweeks necessarily, that make the margin razor thin. Like you would need to win a lot of games here down the stretch and probably get pretty deep into the tournament in Omaha. But Nebraska did really well early in the season against their non-conference foes. Those non-conference foes are actually pretty good, and they're winning a lot of games. Like Grand Canyon is doing really well in its conference. That helps a ton. Nebraska scheduled pretty aggressively, and they took care of business when it mattered. And now you're getting the benefits of that, even if you stub your toe on a Sunday against Minnesota. And I think to kind of add to the conversation about the midweeks, and you're also seeing it a little bit on Sundays too. Nebraska did a really nice job of addressing its pitching depth in the bullpen, which they needed to do coming off of last season because it was basically Shea Shanneman, Corbin Hawkins last year. Both of those guys were gone. You needed a lot of arms. They did that. They have a lot of guys that can throw one inning, and you feel reasonably comfortable with that. The place where they've been struggling is you have, I would say, two starters comfortably in Mason McConaughey and Brett Sears, but it's been difficult nailing down the midweek role and finding a guy that can do it for you on Sundays. And that's been the two places where you've seen Nebraska stub its toe a bit, where you've gotten off to bad starts on Sundays and the offense hasn't been able to hold up its part of the bargain. And that's kind of where the struggle is right now. So there's still a lot out there for Nebraska baseball. If you look at what kind of the projections, most have them as a fringe host, really high number two seed in the NCAA tournament. And, they just got to get it over the finish line here and keep playing decent baseball. So we'll see if they can do that. But to answer your question from long ago, you probably got to win both series for sure. You got to get into Omaha and win a couple games there, I think, to feel really comfortable about where things kind of stand and hope for chaos around you in the standings. So we'll see if they can do that, but need to just play a little bit more consistently down the stretch here.
When the regional sites are picked, do you think it's always just about the baseball, like what you did, or are there other factors like this is a good, like it's close, this is a good host site? I mean, do they plan a little bit ahead, you think, where like sometimes I wonder, for instance, with college basketball, everyone's like, oh, the last weekend conference tournament, like do this, well, this helps. I think a lot of times the brackets are basically set, by like Friday. And I'm just asking from the baseball standpoint, is there that point where there's not that much shuffling left to be done in what they're going to do? Or do you think there's a cutoff point?
Yeah, I think to a degree, I think so. I mean, I've always wondered this, and I don't know if it's true. So I'm just speculating here, but I think any time that you sometimes see like a team that's not in the Southeast get close to that conversation, I've always wondered if you kind of get a little benefit of the doubt of like, hey, Indiana State's pretty good this year. They're like 17th in the RPI. Let's maybe make them a host, versus another team that might be a little bit higher in the RPI. I think it in the past has generally gone pretty close to that, but I think there's also like a little bit of, it's still a regional sport to a degree. And that's why like you see Nebraska as a 2. If Nebraska makes it as a 2, it's like, okay, well, it feels like there would be a pretty strong chance that you're probably headed somewhere in Oklahoma, or if Indiana State's a host, maybe there's a 2. Like, I think that still matters a little bit. We'll see if it does or not, but I don't think that there's usually a ton of movement late on that stuff.
But they might actually like the small, like Indiana State. They kind of like those setups.
Yeah, as long as they can do it. Like,
yeah,
and it's interesting. Nebraska hasn't hosted since. I mean, it's been 15 years.
Been a while.
It would be interesting to see how that would look, because it just there's a lot more requirements now for space and things like that Nebraska just hasn't had to deal with ever. So
right.
But anyway, that's a problem that I'm sure they would welcome. But we'll see if they can continue to get it done here with Indiana. I guess South Dakota State on Wednesday, the Jackrabbits, and then 3 against Indiana at home.
7 games left, huh? And then the
Yes.
tournament. Yep.
Yes. So
why not win them all? I say.
Yeah.
Just win them all.
Just Lou Brown the heck out of it. You're good. So that's where things stand. Anything else we didn't get to?
We didn't talk about my T-Wolves, but that's all right.
Man.
No, that's all right.
You have to admit, as a Minnesota sports fan, there was probably part of you when they were up 30 that you were still like, there's no way they win this game.
Yeah. First off, I'm not like a monster T-Wolves. I did order a T-Wolves hoodie the other night, though. Not as a bandwagon. I think they have a sweet logo. I always have liked their like uniforms and what they do. I have a dog. The logo reminds me of my dog Ronnie, howling at the Foxes. So I got one of those. But yeah, the T-Wolves. Well, the funny part would be if they broke through. Obviously, the Twins won the World Series back when I was little, 87 and 91. But sort of this modern age, it'd be funny if the Timberwolves of all teams were the professional sports franchise in Minnesota that busted through the door and won the whole thing, which last night they actually look like is possible. There's still work to do. But, yeah, the bandwagon's filling up for my Wolves.
Yeah, Target Center is going to be rocking. They play at the Target Center, so I was asking if KG and Stephon Marbury.
Yeah, whenever I throw you a T-Wolves text, you always, which I appreciate because we're both sort of the John Tesh NBA on NBC era.
Yeah.
For bet we want the inside stuff from Ahmad Rashad still if he could deliver that.
How's J.R. Ryder looking? That's what I wanted to know.
Yeah. So I'm with you there, but yeah, they played defense last night, man. That was like a defensive clinic. And for these old heads like me are like, they don't play any defense in that league anymore. Last night, the Wolves were getting after it and telling me to stick it where the sun don't shine. So I was impressed by him.
The Venn diagram of your fandom, which includes regional and like plays defense. Like there's a lot of overlap there. Perfect for you.
Do you have a team? This was how it finished because the T-Wolves are this for me. I consider myself a casual. Like I'm not a diehard, but I do admittedly, even through the lean times, they've been that team where I'm like, where are they at in the standings? Like every week or so, you'll pop in and be like, oh, they're 24 and 37, and like you'll catch up. Do you have a team like that where you're not like no?
No, I don't. I mean, the drive to Memphis should have been a pretty good indication of my knowledge about the NBA these days. When I'm asking you about like, they do what now with the format? Like, I was shocked.
7 through 10.
Yeah, by some of the teams where they were in the standings, and you were like, "Yeah, that's what happens."
Yeah, we got to make sure LeBron gets in the playoffs.
Yeah,
I'm just kidding. I'm not going to get in that argument.
So no, I don't have a team. I would. I mean, the Sacramento Kings seem like a fun team to follow, but I don't have any allegiance.
One of my last favorite NBA teams was the Kings. With Peja, Weber, Vlade, Mike Bibby.
That was the one it was the big fix, right? Like the refs fixed it.
They got screwed, man. They got screwed against the Lakers. People can go look at game 6 or whatever it was. That was something was not on the up and up there. But yeah, the Kings, you should be a Kings fan because your A's are going to Sacramento, aren't they?
I can just buddy them up. They probably get like a 2-for-1 deal on hats. So get me an A's hat and a Kings hat. That's
what the guy's counting on too, is because Sacramento does care. They're like sort of like we are around here, I think, about sports, where it's like, oh, you're gonna give us a team, we're gonna show you how much we care about it.
Yep.
And I wouldn't be surprised if they, I don't know, they might stick around there. We'll see. But the NBA playoffs is going hot right now, and my Wolves are doing well. I've been to one Timberwolves game. It was right after Blair Walsh missed the field goal against the Seahawks in that -30-degree game, and there was like 3,000 people max in the arena. My brother and I like took off our 8 layers of clothes, like up in the upper deck, and had all sorts of room. It was interesting.
Everybody just pissed off.
Yeah, the guy there was a college kid at the door taking my ticket. He's like blanking Blair Walsh, all that. But so the Wolves and I have seen each other at our worst, so now I'm looking at their best, and it's kind of a fun scene.
Yeah, that's a good look.
I'm sure a lot of our podcasters are really interested in that T-Wolves talk too.
Yeah, well, I mean, they've seen us at our worst too. So we're going to have tons on the site, kind of coming off of spring ball. Nebraska coaches are on the road recruiting during the evaluation period in May. The camp season less than a month away in June. And so lots to talk about at Husker247. Get to the site, read all of our content. We'll be back next week with another podcast, maybe some more T-Wolves talk if we have time. Thanks for listening.